lots of money has flown into manufacturing. The private sector has not stepped up yet, right? So it's still very government push, right? 50% from central government. We are expecting foreign companies to come and use this capacity. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. So it has to be Indian companies that are going to fill up these capacities. This time, I believe it's real because there's ground activity going on, right? Tata's, a classic example. Micron is, setting up. So there is some amount of that going on. I think we will start creating products which make sense, which makes better reach out to community and society, whether you're talking about global warming or water or, the real issues, right? I feel there's a lot of innovation that's going to happen on the packaging side. There's a lot more focus on the packaging side of things where you can build subsystems and things like that. So I think that is virgin territory now, right? So India could almost at a level playing field. It's a legitimate place to start.
Where is the proven talent in India? IT coders be transferred into yield engineers, fab engineers. These are two different perspectives.
Even if you have the money, right, to do it, you just can't do it, right? I mean, I don't think, we can build a 28 nanometer fab in India in the next 3 to 5 years.
They said, we have the money, we have the water, we have the land. I said, don't have the people. And that's the real secret to the game, is the people, the semiconductor ecosystem. Or for any progress in any semiconductor manufacturing.
So I think tax is definitely an area that needs to work on. The land cost will always be high. In the overall scheme of things, land is not the major cost. India has plenty of land to do it.
Policy flips every election cycle. How do you guarantee that in terms of a 20-year depreciation schedule in a 5-year political horizon, as one would say?
Welcome Raja Manickam, founder and CEO of IVP Semiconductor, whose illustrious career spans over 3 decades of pioneering work.
From successfully building companies like TSolve and leading Tata Elxsi semiconductor business, Raja's profound impact on IC design and manufacturing is undeniable. As founder and CEO of IVP Semiconductor, he continues to drive innovation, creating opportunities and real solutions. His deep expertise in nurturing growth,
especially for small and medium enterprises, offers invaluable perspectives. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Salah Nasri. And whether you are an industry veteran or someone that's just curious about semiconductor manufacturing, this is your podcast. Now, before I jump on directly to this wonderful discussion we have for you, I need you to do me a quick little favor, and this is all I ask. Click that subscribe button, okay? The more clicks, the more subscribers, the more powerful and interesting this discussions will happen, and I'll be able to leverage great interviews like the special guest that I have today. So, without further ado, today's SLP, Semiconductor Leadership Podcast interview will be with Raja Manickam, CEO of IVP Semiconductors, which is a fabulous company based out of India. And in today's discussion, we'll cover his career, how he started, how he got into semiconductor manufacturing, all the way through to starting up TSolve, a very familiar name in the IC design world, and then to being CEO of Tata OSAT business, and then to running his own company, IVP again. So touch wood that he gets classed as a serial founder after this discussion. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Raja, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Salah.
Great.
This is very, very interesting, and I'm happy to do this.
Great to have you here, Raja. Great. Raja, looking at your resume, I was going through it, and you came out of IIT Kharagpur. Did I pronounce that right? Kharagpur?
Yes.
Graduate roles. And then you went into the notorious move that everyone who does well in semiconductors is Texas Instruments. Historically, the greats have been at Texas Instruments, came out. Morris Chang went to Texas Instruments, came out of there. Then you went to Fairchild National, and I presume that was out of Singapore.
Yes.
Marvelous. And then Statupac, very well known OSAT, of course. And then UTAC as well, another well known OSAT out here. I know them very well. They're all members of our association, by the way, the International Semiconductor Industry Group. I'd be intrigued to know, what were the pivotal roles that shaped your view of the semiconductor industry throughout that journey?
Yeah. No, I think, just to let you know on IIT, right? IIT was a fantastic experience. As you probably know, right? IIT is very one of the top institutes out of India. What it gives you is a lot of confidence, right? Confidence that even an average person or even below average person can achieve a lot of things. So that was one of my fundamental, beliefs that when I started. And TI was also very fortunate that I got into TI. I had interviewed with TI and Fairchild and IBM, and I really wanted the IBM job, but they didn't offer me. But I got the TI job, and TI is truly a what I call pressure cooker, right? They throw you in, they really make you work hard in the early years, right? So that kind of molded me, that how to work from the bottom up. The other thing was TI was in operations, right? I was a factory guy. Usually most of the people end up as designers, right? So when you start with design, there's nothing more to go further up, right? But when you're a factory guy, you're in the lowest part of the totem pole, right? So you got to work your way up, right? And that was, again, to me is a blessing in disguise that I got to work from the bottom, right? So understood factories and so forth, right? And then I used to run a business unit when I was in Fairchild National. Fairchild got bought by National Semiconductor. And I used to run the telecom business P&L. So I learned business side of how a semiconductor company operates. And in the mid-90s, I was involved, early 90s, with Nokia, where, they had... during the heydays of Nokia, so National was trying to sell product to them. So I was involved in that. And then India just opened up the telecom sector. So I used to go to India to meet with, to get our products designed in and so on. So a lot of, different exposure. So, kind of I could say I have a very unique semiconductor experience, right? From factory to running a business unit. And then I was in an OSAT, so I was on the other side providing a service, right? And stats, I was like employee number 4, all right? So, it was a ground-up approach, when you're sitting on the other side and, negotiating and also building technology. So, in a way, right, I was very fortunate throughout my career that I could get exposure in all of this. So it gave me a lot of confidence that I could build a company. And that's what, finally I said, hey, started TESOL.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, what inspired you to say, right, I'm done with these large multinationals and I'm going to move to TESOL in 2003?
Okay.
Straight after the crisis, the first web situation, right?
Yeah. So I tell you, very frankly, I was a vice president of, I was one of the companies and in Silicon Valley. And, I used to come home and complain to my wife all the time, I'm surrounded by very incompetent people you don't want to make any decisions. And the higher you go in a multinational, right, the less risk you take. And, you're just like, go along with the crowd. And I'm kind of a guy who's always like a little bit of a maverick in me, right, that I always wanted to do things differently. And so my wife actually challenged me on this. She said, if you're so smart, why did you go and start your own company and do it? And that kind of pushed me through and said, and both my kids just were in college. So I said, okay, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. Of course, you're in Silicon Valley, right? Half the time you're listening to people who are successful and so on, right? So all of that put together, right? I said, no, I got to do it. And if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And I always said this, thing about India, right? You know, India really gave me the start, right? I come from a very average, below average family, and the education system and all. I always wanted to contribute back to India, so I always wanted to come back to India. So that was another thing that was driving me. And test is something that I think I can do in my sleep, right? So I started a test engineering services company, and I said, hey, if someone could do this, it'll be me, right? So there's a lot of confidence, Silicon Valley confidence, and I just finally, sometimes people ask me, right, why do you start a company? As a test engineer, you'll never be a CEO of a company, right? Either a designer is the CEO of a company or a marketing guy. A test engineer, this is history. So if you want to be the CEO, you better start your own company.
All right.
Okay. So, I mean, all of this, right? And I thought the timing was good. There's a lot of services companies coming up in India. And services require a lot of people. So I thought, India will be the right place.
But what unmet need did you feel in test and design was required, and why India?
No, I always felt that, India missed the boat in semiconductor, right? Manufacturing and so on, right? Because it was a very closed economy. With all the deep talent we had, right? And I was wondering, why is it that, we didn't make it? And I wanted to create the infrastructure and ecosystem that Silicon Valley had, right? Was enabling all this startups and so on, right? And I said, hey, why don't I go and create the ecosystem for Indian companies to flourish? That was, the need, I thought, right? But unfortunately, when I started the company, and then focused on tests, right? Because there are a lot of design houses already, just doing services.
Yes.
For the big companies, design service. But post-silicon, which was my forte, didn't exist, right? So there was a need for that. So I thought, we could do, so we kind of pioneered that, right? Because handling physical silicon and all that with all the government, I got to bring in product through customs and all that was not that easy those days, right? So it worked through the logistic systems and all that. But I thought if the design is going to be done in India, the bringing up of silicon should be done there too, right? Because, there's a lot of interaction that happens between your designer and your guys, right? So that was another, thing that I saw. There is a need for it. But unfortunately, there was not too many startups in India at that time. So we ended up doing the same thing, just doing service for the big boys, right? Whether it's Intel or AMD or Broadcom or Qualcomm, they're all my first customers, TI. So we were basically providing services for these big boys.
What's the value? Why? Sorry to interrupt. But what's the value for them to be using a test services? Is it purely cost orientated?
There was some amount of it was cost, but also, post silicon, already the manufacturing had moved to Asia, right? So a lot of the activity related was closer to the factories, right? So test and product engineering was closer to factories. So having some organization in this part of the world made sense for these big boys, right? And they also, so the interesting was the expertise in test and product engineering started to reduce in the US and, and to some extent Europe, right? So, so they were losing that part of the skill, and it was taken up by the people from the factories and, just maybe just above the factory, right? So so that was one of the geographical shift that I saw. And they were not willing to do it on their own, as they were done in their design, right? Because design was easy to do, right? Because it's all computers, virtual world, right? So here, you needed testers and equipment and so on. And they didn't want to put capital in, in India and so forth. So, I saw that as a gap. And so TI was one of my first customers.
Wow.
Right. And then Qualcomm Ventures put money into our company. Applied Ventures invested. They were their first investments in India. It was through TESOL.
Through TESOL, wow.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, in terms of the significant costs, were you talking about in terms of ATE, probe cards, These were the specific investments that you were doing or?
Yeah. So I was doing the actual testers,
Okay.
right? Usually there are about $1 million plus, right? Per
Yeah.
testers and handlers, probers, clean room to some extent. And then we had a huge team designing probe cards. And so we had about 300 people, just, PCB designers.
Mm-hmm.
It was fantastic, right? I mean, we were doing 30, 40 layer designs out of India in a second tier city,
Wow.
right? And, my cost structure was less than 1/5, of a PCB designer in India, in the US or so, right? But, good quality work, right?
Right.
So it's not a question of, the ability to do the work. It was just that, you had to train them and all that, and culturally also, right, to respond. But otherwise, the skills were there.
Right. What key strategies then help you cross that milestone of like 1,000 crore mark? Was it pretty much the customer diversification? Was it service breadth? Or was it just purely operational efficiencies that helped you?
No, I think, the trust with the customers, right? Once you build that trust, right? It was a question of they doing it internally themselves or, you giving it to a partner to do it, right? So we build, from day one, right? We were a very professional organization, right?
Right.
Because I was trained by TI. So I always looked at, how TI is run. And, I think it's one of the best run companies in the world. They've survived, so many different ups and downs, right? So I always wanted to build a very professional organization, right? Following that, right? So when I interacted with my customers, they were seeing something very similar, right? So for them to, work with us wasn't a difficult choice. But I think the other thing was we were bringing some innovation in terms of time to market. We were building some tools, productivity tools and so forth, because we were very focused on test, right? Whereas, for a chip company, right, test is like an afterthought, right? Their focus will be on the design and so forth, right? So, we brought in some value which helped them to, especially to go to market. And, test is the last step before,
It goes to the end
you
user.
go to the engineering samples, customer samples, and then, ramp, right? So anything you can do to reduce time to market and give, high quality yield and reliability was a huge benefit to these guys.
I see.
Yeah.
In terms of design, fabs, and OSATs, I mean, from your perspective, actually, the better question, I want to stick still on the TestSolve story. Looking back, what best practices would you recommend to a founder nowadays to prepare them for something that you did with regards to TestSolve? Like, what advice would you give out there?
Yeah. See, usually, right, founders have a particular expertise that they're really good at, right? If you're a designer, right? Let's say, you're a very good designer for a PLL or ADC or something, right? So you're really, really good at that, right? But when you're building a company, right, there's a lot of support staff that needs to happen, right? So the organization, right?
Yeah.
And how do you build this, these individuals, right, who can work with you, right? So a lot of times, right, I tell these founders, right, you empower these guys, right, because they will bring some value because you only know so much, right? So it's very difficult. Usually I found, founders, right, to let go, right? Because, the idea is the best idea, right? For me, because, the exposure I had as from where I started to, I've gone across the spectrum of semiconductor business, right? All these different functions I had. So it was easy for me to, figure out, okay, you're good at this, and empower them to do it. So right from start, right? This empowering, was a huge benefit for us. So I was not the bottleneck, right? Otherwise, the founders become the bottlenecks, right? They just can't see the bigger picture versus, what they could be. So that I would advise, It's better to have multiple heads in a company versus just you.
Sure. Raja, you then, correct me if I'm wrong, became the first CEO for Tata's OSAT business. So you actually went against the founder role. So you founded your own company, did it all from scratch, made it successful, and then you decided to join a multinational organization. Why?
Okay, very good question. See, I grew up in India, and my grandfather, in those days, right, is like there were two companies that were, you have to work for, or three. One was the government, right? And second one was Tata, or maybe Tata was first, and then it's government. And then there's another company called Birla.
Birla, okay.
So, those days was like, if you're good, right, they'll say, work for Tata, Birla, or government, right? Don't work for anybody else. I mean, this is the aspiration, right? So if you work for Tata, you've made it, right? So in a way, right, I'm very influenced by my grandfather as well. And, he always said, you should work for Tata, you should work for Tata. So this was a dream come true for me. And I was 65 years old, okay?
Wow. Wow.
When,
you don't look that old.
that was when I joined Tata.
Jeez. So if you don't mind, you're in your 70s now?
I'm 69.
69, wow.
Right.
Long life.
Thank
Cheers
you.
to that, yeah.
So it was one of those things, right? He said like, hey, I fulfilled my, dream, right? This was one of the bucket lists and so on. And Tata is a great company, right? Great company, very, very people company. So it was I could just not turn it down. And I talked to the chairman, right? Chairman wanted me to, say, have you come on this side? So it was great. So just couldn't refuse.
But it wasn't a smooth ride, was it?
Yeah, I think,
what would you say were the biggest challenges that you faced?
I would say, being an entrepreneur, doing it my way, final decision is mine. I'm a good listener and, I take a lot of inputs, but I always believe a company is a dictatorship, right? It has to, one guy has to make the call and stand by it. Everybody has to follow it. So I'm used to making decisions right or wrong, right? Whereas in Tata, there was a lot of by committee and, the hierarchy, right? And I think it didn't suit my personality.
Okay.
We had a common, thing we wanted to achieve, but it's just that I wasn't, the kind of person that could bring all this together.
Okay.
So it was, it was a great experience. I laid down some foundational work. And then I said, hey, it's better for me to work from the outside to support in any way. They've hired Randhir, who is a corporate guy.
From Intel.
Yeah. So,
How do you feel he's doing?
I think he's doing great. I think he'll be a good fit. He's bringing a lot of Intel people and global foundries.
That's your pack as well.
Yeah.
Victor. From your perspective, right, why would Tata bother with an OSAT? There are great OSAT companies out there. You look at the top 10, if you ASE, Amcor, JSET, StaturePack, TFME, KYEC, Chipbond, Chipmos. These are UTAC that they used to work for. These are remarkable OSAT companies. Why is Tata bothering with the OSAT industry when it's already dominated by the greats?
Yeah, I think, there is, this is the India story, right? India wants to have its own, manufacturing, and government is pushing for it and so forth, right? So I think for a large country like India, right, the dependence on, semiconductor in general. And there is a thinking that, manufacturing needs to be done in India, right? And the low-hanging fruit, lower risk is the OSAT, right? So you need to learn how to walk before you run. So that was the, and Tata is a, great company, right? And they have a long runway if needed to. So if someone can execute, it'll probably be, a Tata. So I think there is a lot of government influence.
Yeah.
And I think the Apple story also, right? Tata is very big into Apple manufacturing.
Yeah.
So I think kind of said, okay, let's move up the food chain. And now they're doing the fab as well.
Yeah. So if we look at the perspectives of India's semiconductor ambition, which is something I'm going to drill into right now, is that in terms of design, fabs, and OSATs, where does India stand now? And what do you feel should be the gaps that must be closed the fastest?
Yeah. I think the last year and a half or so, lots of money has flown into manufacturing. I mean, basically, it's government-run initiatives. The private sector has not stepped up yet, right? So it's still very government push, right? 50% from central government and all for the manufacturing part of it. So I would say about 10 billion plus has been, spoken for and is being spent right now, right? Tata, Micron, all these guys, CG Power and all that. So the manufacturing is, I think will, next 2-3 years, you'll start to see, taking roots. Now, my fear is who's going to fill this capacity, right? And this is where I think, you put the cart before the horse, right? We are expecting foreign companies, right, whether it's AMD or Intel or TI or whoever, to come and use this capacity. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. They have their own supply chain and all that. And, they're building their own capacities as well, right? The US is building capacity, Japan is building capacity, Europe is building capacity, and so on, right? So I think, the demand has to come, right? Who are the demand creators? It has to be Indian companies. So, so IVP is one of them, right? So I think the gap is, who the demand creation. So the expectation is, Indian companies ending up becoming anchors in these, right? Otherwise, it'll be raised to the bottom in terms of cost and so on. And I don't think, India will have that kind of cost structure that already, Taiwan or China has already, right? With depreciated equipment. And they're, technology-wise, they're 20 years ahead, right? So for us to catch up as well as, become viable is going to be tough. So it has to be Indian companies that are going to fill up these capacities.
I mean, Raja, when I was doing research about this in terms of the Indian semiconductor ecosystem, did a lot of reading on it. What's interesting is that since 2012, we've watched a parade of MOUs that have happened. You had IBM, Tower Jazz, Foxconn, Vendetta, you name it. Why should anyone believe today's promises won't age into tomorrow's press release graveyard?
Yeah. No, it's a very, very fair question to ask. I was involved in some of them. And in fact, one of the speeches I made, I said, I'm not going to retire until I see something actually happen in India. Right. And at some point, I think about a couple of years ago, I said, I almost gave up. Right. Yeah. But I tell you, this time I believe it's real because there's ground activity going on, right? Tata is, a classic example. Micron is, setting up. So there's some amount of that going on. And I think, government is putting a lot of effort behind it, right? Money behind it. And, I'm also, kind of lobbying some of the policies and so forth. And I think they're worried, right? If we don't do this, right, we'll be at the mercy of, other countries. And so it's still a very government initiative. The private sector, still has not picked up, in my opinion. But again, see the Adanis or the Reliance and all these guys, I think they have the money to do it. There's a lot of intermediate companies that are, because they call me up for advice. The guys who are in the $200, $300, $500 million businesses in other sectors are trying to get in, right? And they want to put some real money behind it. So I do believe that, India will always have this, right? This MOUs and all that, right? But I think there is some reality as well.
So if we look at the supply chain perspective, India is, of course, touting as a trusted value chain, right? I can't remember where the article I saw in terms of its importance in the ecosystem. Yet the country still imports more than 90% of critical tools and materials. How can, and I'm seeing this around not just India, I'm seeing several countries out there, even in the Middle East, for example. How can one claim sovereignty when, of course, let's say the sub-fab or the fab is still stamped made in Taiwan, made in China?
Yeah, I think, it'll take a long time, right? If you look at the latest and greatest technology, right? But I think, 80% or so, if you take the memory piece of it out, is still, legacy technology, right? Big signal, analogs. And there's a lot more happening, right? Philosophically, there is something that I want to tell you. Why is, suddenly semiconductor becoming, so prominent, right? So you think about it, right? I mean, what is semiconductor, right? I mean, basically, any physics equation, right? You take, you can convert it into a product, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, the research done in photonics or something, right? Now you can create a product, or so you can take an equation, a mathematical equation, and make it into a product, right? So the last, I would say 100 years of research, right? This is all that has come. You can actually make a product now, right? You can use these features, right? And create products, right? And I think that is what is happening, right? That is why you're starting to see silicon photonics or quantum physics, right? Because now you've semiconductor, you were able to create these products, right? Quantum physics, right? So quantum physics has become, a chip now, right? You can take some of the features, right? Yeah. So I think, there is a conversion that is happening, right? So I would say, the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be a different semiconductor in terms of materials or, the kind of products that is going to come out, right? So, India could be, at a point where you're starting from ground zero, right? So you don't have to do what these countries have done 30, 40 years ago, right? You don't have to, ape the same thing, right? If I have to build, my slogan for my company, IVP, is I want to create an Indian TI, okay? So if I want to make a TI today, right, it'll be different from what happened in the 1950s or 60s, right, when TI started, right? Because, the foundation is different. So I would say, there is opportunities that, we may be using different materials or different type of products. And the other thing is, again, philosophically, today semiconductor is controlled by these 10, 20 companies in the board, right? These large companies. And if you look at, they will make expensive products because that's a business model.
Yeah.
Right? NVIDIA doesn't want to sell you $1,000 chip, right? They want to sell you a $10,000 chip, right? So their solution will be that, right? Whereas the Indian, again, right, our frugal mindset culture, and also we are very sociable, very, very socialistic kind of thinking. Right? A lot of Indians have that mindset. I think we will start creating products which make sense, which makes better reach out to community and society. Yeah. And this will be, I think, whether you're talking about global warming or water or, the real issues, right? Products for the, solving the real issues. I think there's a whole bunch of products that will come out in the next 10, 20 years, which will be developed from a country like India versus a country like a US or, so the approach to a problem solving will be different.
If we look at from a foundry or OSAT business perspective, Tata has got a serious the problem to deal with, a serious situation, and I'm talking from a business strategy.
Yeah.
Both businesses, whether it's an OSAT or a foundry or a fab, require high yield and high volume discipline. Now, one would be questioning is, where is the proven talent in India? And I'm not saying it from a perspective where I'm generalizing here, but the fact is a fact that from an IT coding point of view, unbelievable. I mean, it's the best place in the world, India. But can IT coders be transferred into yield engineers, fab engineers? These are two different gravies,
Correct.
two different perspectives. What's your perspective?
Yeah. No, I think, see, I was just, I have a lot of meetings with Japanese guys, right? When you talk about over-engineering a product, right, Japanese stand out, right?
Yeah.
And, India, the perception is, we're a Band-Aid, we just Band-Aid for that moment, right? Get through with it, right? We don't go deep and, try to solve the problem and so on, right? So I think, one of the things that I tell the Japanese guys is, we make a perfect pair, right? You guys over-engineer, but you don't know how to monetize it, right? And, we come from this way, right? We don't go deep enough, right? So, the combination will be great. But also, I think it's kind of a myth. There are lots of Indian companies in the manufacturing sector which make great products, right? Which doesn't come out as much, right? We have a great, not necessarily in the tech side of things. We have a great, leather industry. We have steel forgings and, we make great cars, we think about it, right? Tata makes, great cars. So I think, once they put their mind to it, there is, you could build some of this. And, I've worked in Singapore, I've worked in Malaysia, I worked in US. I worked to some, I actually worked in Japan as well, right? And I can tell you, from a learning perspective, Indian engineers are probably the fastest learners, right? I mean, the classic example was Dassault, right? You can take fresh grads and then you mold them, right? And they're hungry to learn and so on, right? So I think that concept is still there, right? So it's where they start, right? So if you take them out of high school and you put them into this kind of regime where, maybe, with the Japanese kind of collaboration and stuff like that, I think you can mold them and build them out. So they have their own strengths.
It's true. It's interesting. I mean, I have many, I'm not talking about several, more than a handful of very close friends of mine in the semiconductor industry, especially in the US, who are at very high level positions. And I look at it from the whole ecosystem in semiconductor manufacturing, and they're Indians. And I definitely agree with you. I think it's just a matter of providing individuals with the opportunities and then molding them. I think it's adaptable. Absolutely. I mean, one of my dear friends, he's got a PhD or a master's degree in metallurgy, and is now running, advanced packaging for a very well-known design house. Yeah. So it's this just shows you that what you're saying as a case study is actually a reality.
Yep, absolutely.
But when I look at India semiconductor initiatives and comparing it to the countries who have done a really good job, we can't neglect, and I think this is one of the honest truths that people need to listen to, is that China's semiconductor ecosystem is unbelievable. I mean, they are so ahead of the game. And if they had the capabilities to get their hands on the most advanced technologies, they'll be going neck on neck with the leaders of the world, yes, by far.
No question.
No question of doubt. And, when we talk about, it was another article that was talking about energy efficiency, and the best technology at the cheapest rate to actually assist in energy efficiency comes out of China.
Yes.
If we talk about legacy nodes, I think they said by 2030, 30% of legacy nodes will be manufactured out of China. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is if we look at China's history, I mean, in terms of, in 5 years was the analysis that I looked at, they built more than 40 plus fabs.
Yep.
That's a brutal investment.
Yes.
And then when you look at a fab, or even OSATs, they require consistent investment. Can India really stomach this?
Yeah.
Raja?
Yeah. No, I think, you're absolutely right. Talking about energy efficiency, for example, IVP is, my company, right, is working with a local company in Chennai for an air conditioning solution. Okay. Now, air conditioning, in India is going to go through the roof, right? One is, warming and so on. In fact, you can't buy an air conditioner today because, they don't have enough parts to make in India.
Really?
The demand is so high now. Summer is coming, right? Now, we take the solution that is available today, right? It's actually going to make things worse, right? Because, air conditioner actually put a lot of heat as well. Okay. Now, I'm working with a company which reduces, for the same, for the air conditioner output, 40% lower energy consumption, right? And that's technology. It's actually driven by a gentleman who is 10 years older to me. He's from IIT Madras, right? He's a, real power guy, right? So he makes power motors and so forth. So my point is, we will have our own innovation, right? A lot more customization is going to also happen as well. And I think, there's going to be a lot more distributed, manufacturing, distributed R&D versus this massive, concentrated, I'm a big believer in distributed everything, right? You produce power where you need it, when you need it, and, it's not going through, transmission lines over, thousands of kilometers, right? So I think, there is a lot more that I think is going to happen in a more distributed way. India will probably have its own, maybe sensors and MEMS, and, that will, you need to interact with the real world at a community level. So I think we will go back to the roots of, how products are made and used within the community. So I think the centralized model, right? And I've done some, mathematical, financial model as well. See, every time you try to build a fab, right, they say it's $10 billion, right? Minimum is 10 billion, right? And then you got to keep feeding more and more, right? Because you want to consolidate more fabs together, right? For scaling, right? But I think, you think about, then all you think about is how do you fill the fab up?
Yeah.
Right. In order to, so instead of, when I was in TI, right, we used to, we had our own fabs, but the fabs were used only for our products and when we needed, right? So it was not the other way, right? The fabs were not driving product, right? The products were driving the fabs, right? Now we've gone to it, the reverse, right? We build these huge fabs and then we say, hey, how do I fill up the fab, right?
Yeah.
So I think, we will start to take a step back where it's going to be a lot more distributed and we'll work that efficiency, right? And then where you make the money and where, fabs are always losing money, right? As you know, even today, right? So that model doesn't work anymore, right? So to me, making it even bigger, why would it work? You're trying to do the same thing, more and more, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe it will be a lot more captive to a particular business.
Do you think that a fab is really necessary? I mean, there was a quote that I saw the other day where it says, we celebrate Micron's assembly plant in Gujarat, but it's still a back-end node.
Yes.
So is India destined to live in the packaging basement while Taiwan and Korea or China stay on the process tech penthouse, as one would say? What do you feel with that quote?
I feel there's a lot of innovation that's going to happen on the packaging side.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of innovation. I mean, even if you look at what Lip-Bu said recently in the Intel thing, right? There's a lot more focus on the packaging side of things where you can build subsystems and, things like that. So I think that is virgin territory now, right? So India could almost at a level playing field, right? And of course, TSMC is a little bit higher, but we're not too far away, right? So it's a legitimate place to start, right? So packaging for sure, right? Now on the fab side of things, right? Yeah, no harm, taking wafers from anywhere in the world and squeezing their price out. And I think, some critical industries, will come to India and so on. And like I said, right, if you ask, you give a problem to NVIDIA, right, and you give a problem to a startup in India, same problem. NVIDIA will come up with a very good solution, but a very, very expensive solution, right? Indian guy may come up with, maybe 1/10 the cost, maybe 80-90% solving the problem. So you may have to do other things to get it to 100%, right? So I think, we'll have our own way of thinking the way, how we want to do it. I'm a test guy, right? So, you can test the hell out of it or be very smart about getting to the quality of the product much faster. That's how I'm taught to that, So if you're a good test engineer, how do you, find the fault in the shortest time? Okay.
I think, saying what you just said, I mean, it sounds like from the Indian mindset is quite similar to the Chinese mindset in that type of engineering perspective. Because, I mean, China SMIC's touting 5 nanometers, and people are questioning how did they do 5 nanometers, right? With the lack of technology, right? And then you've also got the DeepSeek situation where, I don't know, they say they've done it with like a handful of millions, which it might not be true. But, even Jensen recently said, that caught my attention. And I think when he said it, people realized that they're not that far behind. And I think it's because of the mindset. I think 50% of AI's development is done by the Chinese, actually.
No question.
So it's quite interesting how that mindset you've spoken about, making the most of less, I think is the term. Correct me if I'm...
So you come with a different solution all the time, right? And in India has a track record in this, right? Because there were sanctions on India for a lot of technology historically, right? And, our space program and other programs, right, were all indigenously developed because of some of the sanctions, right? And the solutions are, very practical, down to earth, frugal in some sense.
Yeah.
Right? We don't need, 2 nanometers or, so I think, I believe people are very, very adaptable. And then you make do with what you have and they will come up with solutions.
The Indian government is saying that, the ease of doing business has improved. I'm still hearing whispers about custom red tapes and unpredictable GST refunds. And I'm also hearing that the infrastructure situation is still a massive problem. What's your thoughts on these comments?
I think all of those are true, especially the tax, right? Very unpredictable. And especially if you're doing, investments that are going to be 10, 20, 30 years, right? You need to have understand what the tax structures are, right? And that's still a work in progress in that sense, right? I mean, look at Singapore, for example, right? It's very predictable, right? And, for this kind of industries, right, where you're investing for 10, 20, 30 years, right? The predictability is very, very important. So I think, they're trying to exempt certain industries and all that. But India, is a wild place in that sense, right? Democracy, wild, right? So the tax guys are, they have a free hand in everything, right? So I think tax is definitely an area that needs to work on. Infrastructure, I would say, more or less is getting there, right? I mean, look at Bangalore, right? I hate to go to Bangalore because of
traffic,
right? You can have 1 meter.
One of a kind, of a kind,
yeah. But there's India is always a chaotic place, right?
Yeah.
If you like chaos, you thrive in that, right? And like a Singaporean, right, for example, right? It's so well organized, right? When they go outside of Singapore, every place looks so disorganized for them, right?
Yeah.
Right? But Indians can survive everywhere,
Sure.
right? So I think it brings a different person. But I certainly, a power situation has improved very, very significantly. Getting clearances and all that. Now there's a lot of competition between the states, right? So they want to give you licenses of clearing land and all that kind of thing. So I think the infrastructure from roads and railways and all, I mean airports are great now, right?
Yeah.
The connectivity in airports and now Tata has taken over Air India as well. It's going to give some of the Middle East airlines some fight there. But I think generally I would say 10 years from now it'll look different.
Land acquisition was, of course, the iceberg that sank past fab bids in India. Do you feel that India has actually solved the environmental clearance and water rights maze, as one would say? Or do you feel that it's just kicked it down the road for a bigger rhetoric?
Yeah, I think, you see the good news about this environment is Indians are very fiercely compliant on this. The local population could, stop something if they feel that, it is going to impact the environment. So in a way, that's a good thing to have, right? There's a check and balance, right? You don't allow industry to run away with just, for the sake of the industry, right? I would say the land is an issue because, it's private land, right? Unlike China, right? Where government can step in and say, "Look, I'm taking you over there, please move on," right? In India, it's not, right? And the land cost will always be high. But I tell them, look at semiconductor industry, right? Look at Singapore, for example, right? Woodlands area and some area. The amount of fabs that they have there, right, within a small area, they're generating billions of dollars of revenue.
Right.
So you're really not talking about, thousands of acres or tens and thousands of acres of land that you need, right? India has plenty of land to do it. And in the overall scheme of things, right, land is not the major cost, right? But from a businessman, right, in India, they always want to own the land. But one big thing has changed is they used to give the land as a freehold. So people wanted more land. So even if the business is not doing well, right, they have the land.
Right.
But now it's all lease.
Okay.
It's all
why is that the case? Why has that happened?
No, just like most countries, right? Like Singapore and all that, right? So government land for industry is not freehold anymore.
Okay.
So, they give it to you, but it's on a 99-year lease or less. And you have to pay the 99 years of lease day one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you got to put some skin in the game, basically, is that right?
So, businesses will complain about it, but I think it's a good thing.
Raja, when I was doing some analysis on yourself and some of the comments you've made, especially when you're at Tata, managing the OSAT business, you said that India can leapfrog straight into panel level and advanced substrates. So what I was trying to think is that that's like someone skipping algebra and going into quantum mechanics straight after. Is that really the case? Because, that's one thing I'm hearing a lot. I'm hearing that the next key thing, the next key driver will be panel level packaging. All the greats are doing, TSMC is working on it, Amcor's working on it, ASE is working on it. Do you really think India has a chance?
I do. And as I mentioned earlier, right, as far as panel packaging or advanced packaging is concerned, we're at, ground zero or maybe just starting off, right? Glass-based substrates, panel-based processing. We're almost, just starting.
Right.
So India, you're also starting along with other people, right? Now, the other people have an advantage where they've done something. Mm-hmm. But when you go to panel, right, it's a paradigm shift, right? So just like, mainframes to PCs, right? The guys who have to change from mainframes to PCs, right? It was, it was tough for them to do that, right? Here we have a clean slate, right? Whether you take Georgia Tech, has done a lot of research into that, right? If Venki is from IT Madras, you may have been.
I know, Venki, yeah.
Yeah. So he's a big proponent of glass substrates. And so he's working with, with some of the companies in India as well, right? So I think, technology is there, right? For the putting a team together, and people are mobile now, right? I mean, some of the people that you've interviewed, right? If you tell them, hey, there's opportunities in India, they're going to move to India, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at Tata, right? They've hired some really, good guys to go. So I think people are willing to move, and, so finally it's a people, right?
Yeah.
There's some amount of, ecosystem that you need to have to support it. Granted, right? Amcor and all that has that, history to do something like that. But I don't think it's, you can overcome some of those things. On the fab is a different story, but I'm a big believer in the, packaging.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was giving a task to kind of bring semiconductor ecosystem to the Middle East. And while I was having these discussions, they were adamant to get a fab in there. And I said to them that you won't be able to do it. And they said, why? Why can we not do it? And I said to them, they said, we have the money, we have the water, we have the land. I said, you don't have the people.
Yes.
And that's the real secret to the game, is the people, the semiconductor ecosystem. Or for any progress in any semiconductor manufacturing initiative, it is the people. On the financial side of things, domestic capital markets currently in India shy away from 10-year ROI. Horizons, as one would say. One needs to question the other key thing is without deep pension funds or sovereign wealth firepower, who's going to really write these LACRAW investments, checks for greenfield fabs, would you say?
Yeah. No, I think, that's why I said, right, it's still a very government initiative today, and there's only so much government can do.
Yeah.
Government has many different things that they need to invest. And lately they found out that semiconductor is not a big employment either, right? A lot of it is highly automated, employment versus, investment is a fraction, right? And India, it needs a lot of employment as well. So I think there's going to be pressure from the government saying, they got to just start some enablers, right? And then the private sector has to step up. I think, probably Middle East will be one of the good sources of, we have good relationships there. And the way I look at it is, you got to look at, don't look at India as, look at that region, right?
Yeah.
I used to draw the map when I was in Tata, right? So if you look at, I call this Greater China, right? You got China, you got Taiwan, to Korea to some extent, right? And that area controls 90% of semiconductor, right? So you can redraw this, right? And say, okay, you include Middle East and you look at India and, Bangladesh or Pakistan, that area, right? You just got a serious amount of people, right? And these solutions that these people need and the solution they will create will be for global. It will cover African requirements and Middle East requirements, and where the real problem needs to be solved, right? Right. I mean, we can't live the way we are today, and be happy about it, right? So those kind of solutions, I think, will come, and people will start to invest in this because they'll believe in that. So I think the private sector has to step up. Right? It's not done so far, in my opinion.
The thing is I think it's important. Well, it is important that every country has an element of semiconductor supply chain because of national sovereignty. Anything can happen tomorrow. As you mentioned, just say, imagine a block on FPGA chips on a country. That's a serious sanction to put on a country, right?
Yeah.
The concern that I see or feel from India's semiconductor perspective is that policy flips every election cycle. And I feel that from your perspective or from my perspective, people that want to get into India and do business with semiconductor ecosystem partners in the region, for example, how do you guarantee that in terms of a 20-year depreciation schedule in a 5-year political horizon, as one would say?
No, I think, this is, again, it's a perception issue because I've worked with the government as well. Although the governments change, right, and sometimes, it's a landslide victory either way, right? They do change. The key policies which are run by bureaucrats, right? The bureaucrats are still the same, right? So there's a decoupling there, right? And I could say, just like software, right? I mean, think about software, right? Software is a big business in India, right? So NASSCOM, which is one of the largest organizations of doesn't matter which government comes into place, right? Because they know, this is a huge industry which is supporting, a lot of Indians and so forth. So they don't mess around with it, right? So I think, whether it's semiconductor or technology, right? It has got a space where, the politics will not, now, the amount of support that they may get
right
with the current government versus a new government may be a little bit different. But I don't think, they will flip the, kind of the policies and so on. The tax is something that they need to work on, right? Despite whichever government it is. But I think, there are certain, businesses like that which are hands off by the politicians. And semiconductor will be one of them. Now is their favorite word, I mean, any politicians, right?
Well, I think, the reason why is because of the 2-letter syndrome, isn't it? AI, right? Everyone wants a piece of AI, and you can't do AI without semiconductors these days. And if you want to have a good foothold, AI is the key thing. And even, when you look at the investments on a global basis,
yes,
it's still today. People are still cautious about semiconductor manufacturing. And as private investors, these are the most cautious. Government, not so much, because government care about the long term. But a private investor, a VC, cares about if they can exit in 5 years.
Correct.
You tell them 10 years, man. Yeah. That's why they like soft stuff, like software.
Yes. Yeah, but it's you're right.
Yeah.
And but you could see semiconductor was not the favorite, until the last, I would say, few years, right? 5 years, right? I mean, look at NVIDIA, for example, the valuations and so on. So I think, it has come back where, it matters, right? And there's going to be a lot of funding, and there's going to be good exits as well.
Yeah.
So, I would say there's a lot more money coming into it, or would come. I work with Peak 15 now, right? It used to be Sequoia.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of funds which, they're very curious about trying to understand semiconductor and trying to put money into it.
Roger, give us the brutal truth, as one would say. What's the single most inconvenient fact no one in New Delhi wants to admit about building a world-class semiconductor ecosystem in India?
I think, they believe that, we can create, our own AI chip, for example, right? Or, we can build the most complex, thing. And I think, you mentioned that as well, right? Even if you have the money, right, to do it, you just can't do it, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't think, we can build a 28 nanometer fab in India in the next 3 to 5 years, right? Which is, even if you pour the money into it, 20 nanometer is a little bit complex already. Yeah. So I think, the rhetoric that, the government wants to, announce and they say, hey, we're giving you the money, but, you need to bring 5 nanometer and so on. I think it's not going to happen, right? On the other hand, I think, where the strengths of India is in the small, medium, what we call industries, right? MSMEs, micro, small, medium industries. There's a lot of innovation that happens in India with that, right? How do you fund these guys, to build, certain niches in the business? And that's very difficult to get through to the government because they want to make these big announcements and, we put 10,000 crore rupees into this or something, right? And I think where the job creation happens is in the smaller industries and so on. So I think I'm sure they know it, but I don't know whether, they're willing to take a step to match that reality. It will be more difficult for, the government as well as the private sector.
No.
To deal with, smaller companies and more of the innovative type of companies. I think, India will be, if we all believe that semiconductor is going to double in the next 10 years, the world needs India as much as India needs the world, right? Who's going to do this, right? It took us, 70 years to get to $500 billion or so, right? And you're going to do that in 10 years, right? Where are the people, going to do this from, right?
Right.
A lot of them are going to be Indians, right?
Right. One of as you mentioned, in the last 5 years, you're in transition from London to the Middle East now in Dubai. Consulting for these sovereign funds and government officials, they asked me, what is the strategy that you advise us to take? And I said to them, each country has a specialty focus. I don't suggest that one country should try and do a whole ecosystem initiative. So I said one country can be a specialist in the OSAT, and the others should be focusing on design stuff. The priority should be having design houses, because if you can create an ecosystem, if you can create a community of design houses, then you will have the right to demand OSATs and at the end, one day, maybe a fab to help minimize the costs on certain elements at the end of the day. I'm intrigued to understand from your perspective, especially with IVP, if you could actually also give us some insight on IVP Semiconductor. What is IVP? What are you providing? And what makes it so special in the Indian ecosystem?
Yeah. See, and a larger question, right, before I go to IVP. See, every country, right? You'll have 10% of the population which is extremely smart academically, and so on, right?
Yes.
Everywhere, including the US, right? Maybe 1 or 2% of smart people actually run the whole country in that sense, right? I mean, even in the industries, right? Semiconductor industry. So whether it's the Middle East or, Egypt or, wherever it is, right? There's very smart people in all these countries, right? So I think those are the people who will make the difference in this industry. So all the countries have that, right? They're smart people. It's just that, you have to create that environment for where they can thrive, right? There are design houses in Egypt now.
Yeah,
right.
Very good on MEMS.
They're very good on MEMS, right?
Yeah, MEMS and sensors.
Right. And then similar countries, right? So I think once you have that kind of mindset, right, then you can work on that. Now coming to IVP, right? So I say a broader vision is, hey, I want to build an Indian TI. Okay. So how they built it and all that, So I have some thoughts on that, but we're focusing on power right now.
As in power MOSFETs?
Yeah, starting with, power discretes, right?
Discretes,
power MOSFETs,
okay.
IGBTs, DC-DC converters, LDOs, right? And the way I'm doing it is, I'm not, redesigning a MOSFET, okay? So intuitively you would think, right, a fabless company is a design house, right?
Right.
So there's a bunch of designers designing stuff and then taking it to market, right? So, but where I am is, I want to engage the customer first. How quickly can I engage with the customer? If I start designing today, it'll take me 3 years before I get something decent to sell to the customer, right? So my goal is to engage with the customer. So what I'm doing is, I'm buying wafers from Taiwan and Japan and so on, right, of existing products to get to market. I'm a big believer in branding, right? Tata taught me that. Tata brand, everybody in the world wants to work with Tata. Whether they've experienced semiconductor or not, right? I used to get people who want to work with Tata because they've heard of Tata, they know Tata, right? So brand matters. And there's, I think you mentioned earlier, there's no semiconductor company in India, despite the fact that we have all these designers, right?
Yeah.
So IVP will be a brand. IVP will be the semiconductor brand. Right? It's a chip company, it will be a brand. So one is, I want to build a brand. So how do I get to customers as quickly as possible? Is that I take existing designs, right? And I do the packaging, I do the testing. Testing I want to do myself because I want to ensure quality. And I will sell it in India. I'm only targeting Indian companies, right? So I want to make the Indian companies successful. And over time, right, if the customer drives us to innovate on the chip, we'll do the design. We have to modify things like that. But so I have two sources of revenue. So one is on the discretes and individual components. The bigger thing is I'm a solution company on the power. So I build a lot of modules now. So I'm actually building, powertrains and power modules, whether it's a EV or it's going into charging and, the other sectors, inverters, solar, right? Solar is a huge market in India.
Mm-hmm.
India is installing 50 gigawatts per year.
Wow.
So I want to own all the electronics that goes behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Transformers, inverters, storage capacity, anything that, I want to own it. Why would I want to give it up to somebody else? This is my backyard, right? So my philosophy is more on the solutions. If I'm going to build a chip company today, it's not going to be just, individual chips. It's going to be solutions.
So for you to be able to do that, I mean, through some analysis, it's good that you mentioned this actually. I discovered that in the laptop, specifically with laptops, if a certain amount is not assembled in India, that there's a subsidy tax that's put onto it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Are you aware of this policy?
No, it's the other way.
Was it?
If you, they call it the PLI scheme, production linked incentive.
Yeah.
If you manufacture parts of the system, you get 4 or 5% back from the government as an incentive.
Okay.
So just to give you some clarity, right? A cell phone, for example, this was one of the first ones they started a few years ago.
Yeah.
They imposed a 13% tariff. I think it was 13%. If you import an entire phone, right? Now, if you assemble the phone, they gave you back 4 or 5% of the price of the phone that you were selling at, right? So if you're selling a phone, let's say for $1,000, right?
Right.
You get $5 back.
Okay.
Or rather $50.
$50,
right?
5%.
Yeah. So that was the scheme. Now they've extended that to, other, laptops and.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
Yes.
Is there a way that they can apply that into the work that you're doing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So they are incentivized to buy from the local.
Good.
Right.
Talking about the PLI incentives, I actually I found another comment that I'd like to run by with you. Is that the PLI incentives headline 76,000 crore, but critics call it checkbook industrial policy. Now the question behind that is India subsidizing competence or just underwriting corporate tourism, as one would say?
Yeah. You see, the PLI helped to bring a lot of EMS companies, right? EMS doesn't bring much value in that sense, right? What I call screwdriver technology, right? But we still had to subsidize, billions of dollars to bring those industries, right? But I think, government had to do some things like that, right? Even though it doesn't make sense, what did we get out of it?
Right.
But I think, it actually created the ecosystem to some extent. And then, so small, slowly other things, right? Sourcing, local sourcing starts to happen. And then now they're trying to, incentivize the sourcing. It could be done better, but, having a large country and, corporates will take advantage, right? I mean, it's how it is, right? But they're being very strict about auditing and all that, and that's another thing, right? The news is always about, Samsung got audited, or someone get audited after 5 years or 10 years, and they were to pay this huge tax because they didn't keep their books in a certain way and so on. I think all those are that you not hear from Malaysia or Singapore or something, right? Business is a lot more smoother. India has its own nuances in that sense, but you have to just work with what you have, I guess.
Where do you see IVP in the next 5 years in terms of being part of India's semiconductor ecosystem in 2030?
To be very practical. I think we'll be like $200 million type of company. Because as I said, right, I'm more of a solutions, and I'm not just dependent on what I can design. To me, the entire globe is R&D for me. I pick the best MOSFET for the particular application, and if it's designed in San Francisco, it's fine. I just pay for the IP and so forth.
And then bring it to India.
Yeah, so I'm a design house that is outsourced design.
It's a great business model,
right?
Yeah.
So I think so I can introduce a lot more products faster. I'm building a platform to go to market. That is where my focus is. So I would say organically we'll grow quite nicely, but I think there's a lot of inorganic opportunities as well. If like there's a lot of carve outs that are going to happen. I think all these big companies are going to carve out as they move towards a more and more AI based thing and all that. So I think some of the basic fundamental blocks will get carved out. It may not be as exciting for them. So we would maybe end up buying some of those. So we could be like a $500 million company with some of the acquisitions possibility in the next 5 years.
Acquisitions in terms of IP access?
No. Acquisitions of some of these
companies, carve-outs. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Raja, thank you for this insightful discussion. I'd like to end this session with a rapid fire round.
Sure.
Where you can answer with just one word or so. One word that describes today's OSAT market.
Too much capacity.
One word that describes, well, that's for several, just say capacity. One word that describes IVP Semi.
Platform.
First thing you check on your phone each morning.
Whether we got a PO?
Biggest misconception people have about India.
Too hard to do business.
Most underrated piece of equipment on a production line.
Tester.
Wafer level, panel level, or fan out. Pick one for the next decade.
Panel.
Hardest lesson you learned while building Tata's OSAT business.
Too slow for our industry.
If you could steal one engineer from any competitor, which company would you raid?
TI.
What keeps you up at night? Yield, cost, or tariffs?
Yield.
The buzzword you're secretly tired of hearing.
AI.
To be fair, if you don't have that, an investor won't invest in you. If you have the word AI, they'll invest in you. Glass substrates, hype or inevitable?
Inevitable.
One metric you obsess over, but others overlook.
It's a time to market.
Time to market. Best advice you ever received from a mentor?
Make decision.
Silicon Valley or Hsinchu for innovation speed? Who wins?
Silicon Valley.
Your go-to stress relief ritual after a 14-hour day?
Running.
If not semiconductors, which industry would you disrupt?
Sports.
Anyone in specific?
Basketball.
Oof. Most inspiring book you've read?
This Born to Build.
Born to Build. I've never read that.
Yeah.
I
forgot the author, but
I'll check it out. Favorite failure? That crucial misstep that set you up later for success?
Acquisition that didn't go well. Was a failure.
Lost you a lot of money.
Yes.
Okay. Robot workforce or human craftsmanship? Where's the balance in 2030?
I think more of human craftsmanship. I think we will just keep moving up.
Okay. Finish the sentence. The next great leap in IVP Semi will come from?
Powertrains.
Raja, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
On the show. If you had one policy wish to accelerate India's semiconductor growth, what would it be and why?
Invest in small and medium companies because that's where the innovation will happen, and that's where you'll create employment, and you'll find real solutions.
Yeah. Are there any other comments that you want to let the audience know about India's semiconductor ecosystem, IVP Semi, or yourself, or whatnot?
I think there's lots of opportunities in India right now, right? And the government is backing it as well. So there's, especially for investors, the risk profile is much less.
Mm-hmm.
Time to get into the market, backing some of these companies, not only in financially, but also bringing the ecosystem, together, whether it's Taiwan or, Japan and so on. So I think a good time to invest in India.
Awesome. Roger, thank you for joining us on the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. If you want to reach out to Raja or his team, you can follow or access them via LinkedIn here under their LinkedIn profile. And yeah, thanks for joining in. As mentioned, if you enjoyed the show, subscribe and share it out there. And remember, it takes a village to raise a chip. Until next time, see you at the next episode. Take care. My name is Salah Nasri, and see you in the next show. Bye for now.